survivors began with a plague that emptied Britain. 8 of that cast are gone now. A heart attack came 4 days after a 60th birthday. One man lost his voice to a wasting illness. Another death was never explained, and one of them had already walked out of Auschwitz. Number 1. Carolyn Seymour. She had the lead in the biggest new drama on British television, and after 13 episodes, she handed it back. Disagreements with the producers over where the show was going and where her character was going ended it. The lead of a hit series was written out, and the program carried on without her, which almost never happened in 1975. Abby Grant was the comfortable wife who buried her husband and walked across a dead England looking for her son. Born in Buckinghamshire on the 6th of November 1947, she arrived with a name nobody kept, Caroline von Benkendorf. Her father was Estonian of Russian descent and her mother was Irish. Television took her on in 1969. Take 3 Girls put her in front of a BBC audience, and the film of Steptoe and Son used her the year after. Then came The Ruling Class in 1972, where she played Grace Gurney opposite Peter O'Toole before she had turned 25. Most careers that start that high begin sliding almost immediately. Hers went straight into a leading role in a brand new primetime drama, and within a year she had handed it back. Marriage came the year after that film. In 1973, she married the Hungarian-born director Peter Medak, and they had 2 children together. 11 years later, the marriage ended in divorce, and by then, she had already moved her working life to Los Angeles. Their 2 children have never been named in public, and she has kept it that way for 4 decades. America gave her a second career and then a third. Heart to Heart used her, and so did Star Trek, The Next Generation, Quantum Leap, Murder, She Wrote, and ER. Then came the work that made her genuinely famous without ever showing her face. She is Queen Mira in the Gears of War games and Dr. Karin Chakwas across the Mass Effect series. Star Wars games have used her, and so has Dark Deception, where she plays a character called Bierce. Millions of people have spent hundreds of hours listening to that voice, and every one of them would walk straight past her in a supermarket. At 78, she is still recording. Since 2014, she has played Abby Grant again for Big Finish in audio dramas that carry on the story the BBC stopped telling in 1977. Speaking about that revival, she said simply, "We have a wonderful team." Abby Grant walked out of one life and crossed a ruined country to build another. Carolyn Seymour did the same thing with an ocean where the motorway should have been. Number 2, Ian McCulloch. 4 years after he was the sensible one on BBC One, he was the star of an Italian horror film so notorious that British police seized it from shop shelves as a video nasty. Lucio Fulci cast him in Zombie Flesh Eaters in 1979. 2 more followed in 1980, Zombie Holocaust and Contamination. Zombie Flesh Eaters was banned outright in Britain, and shopkeepers who kept a copy on the shelf risked prosecution for it. A generation of British viewers knew him as the man who could restart a generator, and a completely different audience across Europe knew him as a horror lead. Greg Preston was the civil engineer who became the practical brain of the group and refused to discuss his feelings. Glasgow made him on the 18th of November 1939. He completed national service in the British Army before going up to the University of Oxford, where by his own account he could not get any parts and ended up doing more opera than acting. Directing a college production of The Government Inspector was as close as he came to a drama career there. Then the Royal Shakespeare Company offered him a contract on graduation, and he made his debut in the 1962 season. His West End debut arrived in Richard III in 1964. The same year, he played Captain Macheath in The Beggar's Opera at Birmingham Repertory Theatre. Later, he took on Martin Dysart in Equus at the Theatre Royal, Windsor. Films came too, Where Eagles Dare in 1968 and Cromwell in 1970. What almost nobody remembers is that he wrote for Survivors as well as starring in it. 3 episodes of the series carry his name as writer, which is a rare thing for a leading actor on a BBC drama of that period, and it was never held against him. Of his private life, there is nothing on the public record at all. No marriage and no children appear anywhere after repeated searching. His brother, Andrew McCulloch, born in 1945, is a television writer and actor, and that is the whole of the published family. Doctor Who used him, and so did Hammer House of Horror and The Professionals, so the British work never dried up. Now 86, he still works the convention circuit. Romford Horror Festival had him in March 2024, Sheffield in 2023, Connecticut the year before that. Between 2014 and 2017, he recorded 14 episodes as Greg Preston for Big Finish. Asked what he remembered of the original series, his answer was plain and short. He remembered it being a very friendly cast. Greg Preston rebuilt machinery in a dead England. Ian McCulloch rebuilt an entire career in the one genre the British censor was trying to ban. At number 3, Lucy Fleming and The Worst Afternoon of Her Life. On the 14th of December 1980, her husband and her 8-year-old daughter drowned together in a boating accident on the River Thames. Joe Laycock and little Flora went into the water, and neither of them came out. Fleming was 33 years old. She was left with 2 small boys, Robert, born in 1973, and Diggory, and she raised them on her own. Nothing in a career prepares anybody for a December afternoon like that one, and she has never traded on it in an interview since. Jenny Richards was the young woman who walked out of London and kept walking for 3 years. Her family had already given Britain more than its share of stories. The writer and traveller Peter Fleming was her father. Celia Johnson, the face of Brief Encounter and later a dame, was her mother. Ian Fleming, who created James Bond at a desk in Jamaica, was her uncle, and her grandfather, Valentine Fleming, was a Conservative Member of Parliament killed in the First World War, long before any of them were born. Growing up in that house meant sitting at a table where the family business was inventing people. Being born into that on the 15th of May 1947 would flatten most people. She went to work instead. The Avengers used her, and in 1967 she played Lydia Bennet in the BBC adaptation of Pride and Prejudice, 8 years before the plague drama that made her name. Survivors kept her for all 3 series. She is the only regular who is there in the first episode and still there in the last, which is why the series feels like her story even when the scripts are following somebody else. Then came 1980 and the Thames. 6 years of raising 2 boys alone followed, and the record of those years is hers and stays hers. What is on the public record is that she kept working, kept the household together, and said very little about any of it. Love came back in 1986. She married the actor Simon Williams, born in Windsor in 1946, the son of the actor Hugh Williams and the actress Margaret Viner, and known to the whole country as James Bellamy. In Upstairs, Downstairs, he brought 2 children of his own from his first marriage to Belinda Carroll, and both of them act Tam Williams and Amy Williams. His sister Polly was an actress married to Nigel Havers, and she died in 2004. That second marriage has now lasted 40 years, 4 times as long as the first one managed. There is a strange, gentle joke buried in her later career. Since 2016, she has played Miranda Elliott in The Archers on BBC Radio 4. Simon Williams plays Justin Elliott, the man Miranda used to be married to. So a couple who have been together for decades spend their working weeks performing their own divorce on the radio, and both of them find it funny. Off the microphone, she does something bigger. After her father died, she and her sister Kate took control of Ian Fleming Publications, which means the quiet, practical one from a 1970s drama about the end of the world now runs the James Bond literary estate. At 79, she is still recording, still writing, still there. She has gone back to Jenny Richards for the Big Finish audio series alongside Carolyn Seymour and Ian McCulloch, and has said she was glad the new scripts let Jenny be independent rather than domestic. Jenny Richards absorbed Lost for 3 series and kept walking. 3 years after the last episode, Lucy Fleming lost her husband and her daughter in a single afternoon, and did exactly that for real with 2 children holding her hands. Number 4 is Cheryl Hall. She married one of the biggest comedy stars in Britain, divorced him, walked away from acting altogether, and turned up years later as leader of the Labour group on Kent County Council. Very few actresses of her generation made a move like that, and almost none of them made it stick. Mavis was one of the ordinary women of the final series, sharp and direct and completely unimpressed. London-born on the 23rd of July 1950, she was working in television by 1969. On the Buses used her in 1971. Doctor Who put her in Carnival of Monsters in 1973. From 1970 to 1973, she was in a relationship with the actor Robin Asquith. Her marriage to Robert Lindsay began in 1974, 2 years before she filmed her Survivors episodes. Then something genuinely painful happened, and it happened in public. From 1977, she played Shirley Johnson, the girlfriend of Lindsay's Wolfie Smith in Citizen Smith. Every week, the nation watched the two of them playing sweethearts on BBC One while the real marriage was coming apart behind the set. They divorced in 1980. Acting carried on for a while after that. Sadie in The Bill took up 4 years from 1984, and there was Dramarama in between, and a final credit on The Bill in 2005 before she formally retired 2 years later. 36 years of screen work, and then a full stop. Politics is where the second half of her life went, and she did not do it by halves either. She stood as the Labour Party parliamentary candidate for Canterbury at the 1997 general election, and she served on Kent County Council, where she rose to lead the Labour group. Now 76, she keeps a low profile and gives almost nothing away. Whether she has children has never been published, and she has never invited anybody to ask. Shirley Johnson spent 3 years listening to a man make speeches about revolution. Cheryl Hall went and put her own name on a ballot paper. Number 5 belongs to a man who should not have lived long enough to act at all. Talfryn Thomas sat in the rear turret of an Avro Lancaster, facing backwards over Germany, in the most exposed and most lethal seat on the aircraft. He flew raid after raid into Germany in an aircraft where the rear gunner had the shortest life expectancy of anybody on board. Then his bomber came down. Every other member of the crew was killed, and he walked away from it, and he had to go on living as the only one who did. Acting was what he took up afterwards, partly as therapy for what that had done to him, before he ever trained properly at the London Academy of Music and Dramatic Art. Tom Price was the scrounging, cowardly, faintly menacing Welshman who attached himself to the group and stole from it. Swansea gave him to the world on the 31st of October 1922 as John Talfryn Thomas. He trained first as an instrument mechanic, a proper trade with proper tools, and joined the local amateur dramatic society for something to do in the evenings. Then the war took him. Everything after the crash was, in a real sense, extra time, and after the war he went and trained properly for the stage rather than going back to the workshop. British television used him constantly through the 1960s and 70s. The Avengers, The Saint and Coronation Street all had him. 2 John Pertwee serials of Doctor Who put him alongside the Third Doctor. Cinema gave him Sky West and Crooked in 1965, then Under Milk Wood in 1972 with Richard Burton and Elizabeth Taylor, and the cult comedy Sir Henry at Rawlinson End in 1980. Dad's Army is the credit most people know him by, and it is also the one that was taken away from him. James Beck, who played Private Walker, had died suddenly and far too young, and the company needed somebody new in the ranks. He joined as Private Cheeseman for a single series from 1973 to 1974, brought in after the death of James Beck, and he was not kept beyond it. Being the replacement for a much-loved man who has died young is a thankless job in any company. He was given one series and no more, and the part was gone, and that was the end of it. His protruding front teeth got him the affectionate nickname Talf the Teeth, and it followed him everywhere. Casting directors wanted quirky and slightly seedy Welshmen, and he supplied them for 20 years without complaint. A man who had been the sole survivor of a bomber crash spent his working life playing cowards and chancers, and by every account, he found that funnier than anybody else did. He was married to a woman named Barbara. Beyond her name, his family life was never written about, and it stays private now. Then came his 60th birthday on the 31st of October 1982. 60 is not old, and he was working. 4 days later, on the 4th of November, in Cardiff, his heart stopped. He was 60 years and 4 days old. The cards would still have been up on the mantelpiece. No funeral report survives in the public record, and no burial place is recorded anywhere that can be reached, which for a man who was on British screens every few weeks for 2 decades is its own quiet injustice. Tom Price ran from every crisis and stole from his friends. Talfryn Thomas sat backwards in a Perspex turret over Germany and came home alone. Number 6. Peter Duncan. He had one job in 1980 that involved being suspended on a rope against the clock face of Big Ben, cleaning it with no safety equipment. 24 years later, he was made Chief Scout of the United Kingdom and Overseas Territories, personally responsible for roughly 500,000 young people. Dave was one of the young incomers who arrived in the closing episodes of the second series. Born in London on the 3rd of May 1954, he trained at the Italia Conti Academy of Theatre Arts and went to school at Horsdown in West Wickham. Stage work came first. Jim Hawkins in the Robert Louis Stevenson adventure led to 2 years at Laurence Olivier's National Theatre, and by his early 20s, he had The Tomorrow People, Warship, King Cinder, and Survivors behind him, plus Stardust, Mr. Quilp, and Flash Gordon on film. Blue Peter arrived in 1980 and changed everything about him. Very few actors get handed a job that turns them into a household name in a single autumn, and fewer still keep it for 6 years. He presented it from 1980 to 1984, and again from 1985 to 1986, and he became the daredevil, the one who did the frightening things so the children at home did not have to. Duncan Dares grew out of that reputation, an entire series built on the idea that he would try anything. He ran the first London Marathon in 1981, then ran it again in 1991, in 2001, and in 2012. Annie Francis married him in 1980, the same year the fame arrived, so the marriage and the household name began together. They have 4 children, Lucy, Katie, Georgia, and Arthur, and between 1999 and 2005, the whole family went on screen together in the travel series Travel Bug and Chinese Breakaway, and in films following Arthur's trips to India and Jordan. His scout years ran from September 2004 to July 2009, and the Blue Peter Gold Badge came in February 2007 for the voluntary work. Now 72, he co-founded a walking and cycling holiday company in 2009. And in 2020, he wrote, produced, and directed a film, Jack and the Beanstalk, that got a national cinema release. Dave was a young man in a story with nothing left to lose. Peter Duncan spent his adult life teaching other people's children how to take a risk and how to come back in one piece. Number 7 is the one that stops people. Hana Pravda was deported to Theresienstadt and then to Auschwitz, and she came out the other side of it alive. Her first husband did not. Alexander Monk was a student activist, and they were taken together, and at Auschwitz they were separated, and that was the last time she saw him. In January of 1945, the guards marched the prisoners out into the snow, and she survived that march too. Through all of it, she was keeping a diary, written as though she was still talking to him. That diary was found many years after the war, and it has been exhibited at the Imperial War Museum in London. Emma Cohen was the older woman in the settlement who held its manners together while everyone else was scavenging. Prague was where it started on the 29th of January 1916 in a Jewish family under the name Bekova. She trained in Leningrad. Czech theatre had her before the war, and she had made 5 films by the time the occupation came. Returning to Prague afterwards, she went back on stage, and there she met an actor called George Pravda. Learning at last that Monk was dead, she married him. Then the couple began a long, restless journey out of Europe. France took them in 1948. Australia took them in 1949, where they ran their own theatre company for a while. Britain took them in 1956 on the personal recommendation of Dame Sybil Thorndike. That marriage lasted nearly 40 years across 4 countries and ended only with his death in London in 1985. Their son is Dr. Alex Pravda, an academic. A granddaughter followed him into the theatre, the actress Isabel Pravda, which makes 3 generations of one family on a stage. British audiences met her as a character actress and had absolutely no idea what they were looking at. She was in Dracula in 1974, in Dad's Army, in Tales of the Unexpected, in Death Wish 3 in 1985. Casting directors saw a small, composed European woman with an accent. What they had actually hired was a witness. Watch her scenes in Survivors again with that in your head. Everyone else on screen is frightened of the collapse. Emma Cohen is simply organizing it because she is played by a woman for whom the end of the world was a memory rather than a premise. None of that is acting technique. What you are watching is somebody who has already done it. Late in life, she put it all down on paper. Her wartime diary was published in the year 2000. As I was writing this diary for you, Sasha, a memoir followed in 2002 called Kaleidoscope: Snapshots of My Life. She was 86 when the second one came out, and she had waited more than 50 years to publish the first. Death came on the 22nd of May 2008 in Oxford. She was 92 years old, and she had outlived the camps by 63 years, her first husband by more than 6 decades, and her second husband by 23. Her cause of death was never made public, and no burial place is on the record. For a woman whose diary sits in a national museum, that silence at the end is a strange thing. Emma Cohen was written as the survivor who had seen it all before. Hana Pravda did not need a single line of research to play her. If that one has stayed with you, tell me in the comments which cast member you had no idea about before today. I read them all. Number 8. Celia Gregory. She stopped acting in 1993 at 43 and spent the rest of her life as a faith healer. 15 years later, she was dead at 58. Of a cause her family have never made public, and almost nothing of that second life was ever written down. Ruth Anderson was the medical student who became the settlement doctor because nobody else could. London gave her a start on the 23rd of September 1949 and then took her away again almost at once. Her mother remarried a German industrialist, and the childhood that followed happened in Switzerland, in Germany, and in Holland, which left her fluent in several European languages before she was grown. Coming back to Britain as a young woman with several languages and no obvious connections, she went almost straight to the top of the profession. In 1973, aged 23, she was in the West End in Saturday, Sunday, Monday, alongside Laurence Olivier, Joan Plowright, and Frank Finlay. 3 years later, she was the Doctor in Survivors, and she was 26. Screen work kept coming for another decade and a half after that, steadily, the way it does for a good actress who is not chasing stardom. Agatha in 1979 put her opposite Dustin Hoffman and Vanessa Redgrave as Nancy Neal. Hammer House of Horror, The Professionals, Bergerac, Juliet Bravo, Casualty and Riley, Ace of Spies all followed. With the Royal Shakespeare Company in 1991, she played Calphurnia in Julius Caesar and Lady Capulet in Romeo and Juliet. Keith Bender was her husband, and they had 2 sons, Charles, born in 1984, and Peter, born in 1987. Her last film role was for Peter Greenaway as a Mother Superior, and then the work simply stopped. That marriage ended in divorce. In 1993, with the boys aged 9 and 6, she walked out of the profession to be with them, and she never came back to it. Her death on the 8th of September 2008 came 15 days short of her 59th birthday. The online notice for her drew more than 9,000 visitors and 28 tributes from people who had known her. Where she is buried has never been published. Ruth Anderson kept strangers alive with almost nothing to work with. Celia Gregory spent her last 15 years trying to do something not far from that, quietly, with nobody filming. Number 9, Denis Lill, who learned to act in an Air Force mess by doing goon show voices. He joined the Royal New Zealand Air Force in 1959 as a cadet, 17 years old and 11,000 miles from any theatre. Inside the service, he found amateur dramatics, took parts in operatic and theatrical productions, and developed a fondness for mimicking the characters of the BBC radio comedy that everyone in the mess listened to. That was the whole of his training, and it is worth saying plainly that no drama school was involved at any point. In 1967, at 25, he left New Zealand for Britain to see whether it would work. Emigrating halfway around the world on the strength of some service reviews and a talent for funny voices is either brave or reckless, and it turned out to be the first. 5 years of scratching about followed before the screen work began, because his first credit does not appear until 1972. Charles Vaughan was the natural leader who wanted to rebuild civilization and sounded like an emperor. Hamilton in New Zealand is where he was born, on the 22nd of April 1942. His professional screen career did not begin until 1972, when he was already 30 years old and had been in the country 5 years. 3 years after that, he turned up in the 4th episode of Survivors, and the producers liked him enough to promote him to the front rank for the 2nd and 3rd series. He is one of only 3 actors to appear across all 3 series, alongside Lucy Fleming and Ian McCulloch. What happened next is the reason he is on this list. He became one of the most used character actors in Britain, and he never once traded on it. Alan Parry, the father of Cassandra in Only Fools and Horses from 1989 to 1992. Dennis Broadley in Outside Edge, Rumpole of the Bailey. 2 Doctor Who serials came his way as well, 20 years apart. Batman in 1989 and Evita in 1996 put him in 2 of the biggest films of their decades, in parts most viewers never noticed. Then, from 2003 to 2011, 8 solid years as the consultant general surgeon Mr. Rose in the ITV drama The Royal. 8 years in one part in your 60s is the kind of security almost nobody in that profession ever gets, and he had already done 3 years of it once before. 53 years and well over 100 credits later, he has never had a scandal, a feud, or a tabloid front page. Now 84, he lives in the Dorset village of Rhyme in Trinsecar with his wife Vanessa. How many children they have is genuinely unclear because the sources disagree between 2 and 5, and the names have never been published anywhere. Half a century in front of cameras, and he has given the press absolutely nothing. He still appears in public. In June 2024, he was at the Doctor Who Appreciation Society event in London, touring in the stage thriller The Verdict in 2019, playing a character called Mo Katz. He told the Bournemouth Echo that he finds theatre the more creatively satisfying work, while film pays better. That is about as close to a complaint as he has ever come in 50 years. Charles Vaughan wanted to father a new civilization and organize everybody in it. Denis Lill organized nothing except a private life so quiet that nobody has ever reported on it. Number 10. Robert Gillespie. He was 6 years old and living in Lille when the German army came into France in 1940, and the family ran. That escape, made by a small boy who did not yet understand what was happening, is the story he chose to write down first, more than 70 years later, in the first volume of his memoirs. Sam Mead turned up in the closing episodes of the third series, played with clipped comic precision. His mother, Magdalena Catalin Singer, came from Budapest. The father, James William Gillespie, was of Scottish descent and came from Toronto. Lille is where he was born, on the 9th of November 1933, and Manchester is where the family finally stopped. At Sale Grammar School, an English master cast him in 3 school plays in a row, and that settled the whole direction of his life. Training at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art followed from 1951 to 1953. 70 years of work came out of that. The Old Vic Company, the Royal Court under George Devine, Theatre Workshop, 2.5 years with the Royal Shakespeare Company that he called Actor Paradise. Television made him Dudley Rush, the harassed cartoonist in Keep It in the Family, a part written specifically for him. He directed 17 productions at the King's Head Theatre in Islington and appeared in over 100 commercials. 2 volumes of memoir have come out of him, the first in 2017 and the second 4 years later. At 92, he is the oldest surviving member of this cast. He runs an online archive of his own working life, and he is still publishing. Sam Mead was a late arrival in a story about people carrying their lives on their backs. Robert Gillespie had already done that at 6 in a French field. Before the last 5, do subscribe if you watch this the first time round. There are more of these coming, and the channel runs on people who remember. Number 11, John Abineri, whose voice you know even though his name means nothing to you. He is the butler in the original Ferrero Rocher advertisement, the one at the ambassador's reception, which has been repeated on British television for 4 decades. Millions of people can quote that advertisement word for word. Almost none of them have ever known who he was. And in June of 2000 in Bath, he died at 72 of motor neurone disease, the illness that takes muscle control away piece by piece until nothing is left. Hubert Goss was the settlement workhorse who did all the jobs nobody else was willing to do. London born on the 18th of May 1928, he described his own schooling with a shrug, saying he was well educated from the age of 5 to 18. Training came at the Old Vic Theatre School, which in that era was as good a start as an English actor could get. Then came the thing that made his career possible, and it was not a performance skill at all. He spoke German, Russian and French fluently, which meant British casting directors could put him in anything as any nationality for 30 years. Hilary Bamford was his wife, and they had 4 children. 3 are named in the record. Danielle Abineri became an actor and writer, Sebastian Abineri became an actor, and there is also Jazz Abineri. 2 of his sons went straight into their father's trade, which is a rare compliment from a child to a working actor, because they had watched the insecurity of it at close range for 20 years. What he is really remembered for is a horned god in a forest. From 1984 to 1986, he played Herne the Hunter in Robin of Sherwood, and for a whole generation of British children, that image is unforgettable. 4 appearances in Doctor Who included General Carrington in The Ambassadors of Death. Blake Seven used him, and so did The Moon Stallion. On film, there were Funeral in Berlin, The Mackenzie Break, The Godfather Part 3, and Giorgino. An Emmy nomination came his way for playing Chingachgook in the television versions of The Last of the Mohicans and Hawkeye the Pathfinder. His last credit is from 1999. He died the following June. Motor neurone disease takes away muscle control by degrees, which for a man whose whole living was his voice and his bearing is a particular cruelty. Where he is buried is not recorded anywhere, and the memorial page that exists for him states plainly that the location of the body is unknown, which is a startling thing to read about a man whose face was in every living room in Britain. Hubert Goss was the man who kept working after everybody else had stopped. John Abineri finished his last job and was gone inside a year. Number 12, Lorna Lewis. She left acting in the late 1980s and went into the church, and in 2003, at 63, she was ordained a deacon curate in the parish of Wye in Kent. 10 years of that followed. She resigned the post in the first months of 2013, and she died that June, only a few months after laying the work down. Pet Simpson was the plain, unromantic settlement woman who did the work and said the obvious thing. Surrey is where she was born, in 1940, and the war moved her out of it almost immediately. Her early life reads like 3 different peoples, spread over 2 continents. She was evacuated to her grandmother's farm in County Laois, in Ireland. In 1949, the family crossed the Atlantic to Forest Hills in Queens, New York, where she finished high school and she trained at a teacher's college in New Paltz. Then she came back the other way and graduated from the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art in London. Broadway had her at 23. In 1963, she was on stage in New York opposite Albert Finney in John Osborne's Luther, which is a career high point most actors never reach at all, let alone before 25. Nobody watching her potter about a farmhouse in a 1970s drama would have guessed at any of that. Television used her on both sides of the Atlantic, The Wild Wild West and Adam 12 in America, Doomwatch and Mixed Blessings and Maelstrom in Britain, and the film Overlord in 1975. She was still working in 1985. Then the whole thing stopped and she went to train for ministry instead. No interview explaining the decision has ever surfaced, and no marriage or children appear anywhere in the public record. So what turned an actress into a curate is between her and the parish. Her death came on the 1st of June, 2013 in Kent at 72 or 73, depending on which month she was born in, because that was never published either. The cause is not on the record, neither is the burial. Pet Simpson held a small community together with common sense. Lorna Lewis ended up doing that for a real parish in a dog collar in a Kent village. Number 13, Barbara Lott. She was married for 53 years to the man who produced the very first episodes of Coronation Street, and the 2 of them never had children. Britain would go on to know her as one of the most famous mothers on television. Edith Walter was the matriarch of a family unit in the closing series, Brisk and Unsentimental. Richmond upon Thames gave her a start on the 15th of May 1920. Her father, William Lott, was an executive at Ealing Studios, so she appeared in small film parts as a child, and she trained at the Royal Academy of Dramatic Art, graduating in 1937 at 17. Rep followed, then the Haymarket in 1944, then her first television role as Viola in Twelfth Night in 1950. A working life of 66 years began there and never really paused. Harry Stuart Latham married her in 1940 when she was 20. He had been a studio manager at Alexandra Palace before the war, and in 1960 he became the first producer of Coronation Street, running the first 60 episodes. That marriage held until his death in 1993, 53 years after the wedding, which for two people in the television business is close to a record. Her best remembered part came in the sitcom Sorry from 1981 to 1988. She played Phyllis Lumsden, the mother who would not let her son leave home, and the nation howled at her every week. Rings on their fingers came before it, and 2.4 children came after, where she was Auntie Pearl for 8 years. At 76, she played Ewan McGregor's mother in The Pillow Book, which is not a film anybody expected to find her in. She died in London on the 19th of December 2002, aged 82, 9 years after her husband. No cause was published and no burial place is recorded. Phyllis Lumsden was the mother who could not let go of her boy. Barbara Lott never had one. Number 14. Michael Gover. He wanted to be an astronaut, and by his own account, he failed at it, and only then did he try acting. Nobody starts a screen career at 49. He did, and the claim about the astronaut ambition is his own, carried on his record ever since without any source behind it. So take it as the story he told rather than a documented fact. Arthur Russell was the older man in the settlement who represented the world that had just ended. Denmark is where he was born on the 31st of August 1913 as Michael O. Philipson Gover, which is not a background any British casting director in 1963 would have expected. That year, he made his television debut in an episode of The Avengers as a character called 1/6 and was brought back 2 episodes later in the same part. Then the work simply arrived steadily for the next 15 years. 10 episodes of Z-Cars, plus Dixon of Dock Green, Softly Softly, The Troubleshooters, Randall and Hopkirk, and Doomwatch. On film, he is the prison governor in Stanley Kubrick's A Clockwork Orange in 1971 and one of the elders in Superman in 1978, which is 2 of the most watched pictures of the decade for a man who had only started at 50. Sussex is where he died on the 2nd of May 1987 at 73. 24 years of screen work, and he had spent almost half of his life doing something else entirely before any of it began. Nothing about his family was ever published, no cause of death is recorded, and no grave is on the register. Arthur Russell belonged to a world that had already gone. Michael Gover did not begin his real life until an age when most actors are winding down. Number 15, Edward Underdown and a small piece of James Bond history. According to Ian Fleming's stepson, Fleming wanted him for the part. It never happened, and the film world went a different way, and Underdown spent his career playing the kind of Englishman that Bond only pretended to be. There is a neat symmetry to it, because the actress who played Jenny Richards for 3 series is Ian Fleming's niece. Frank Garner arrived late as a man of authority in a world that no longer had any. Charles Edward Underdown was born in London on the 3rd of December 1908 and educated at Eton. Before acting, he rode as a gentleman jockey on the flat and over hurdles, learning on his father's Norfolk estate. Riding at that level takes years, and he was doing it for pleasure rather than money, which tells you exactly what kind of household he came from. His riding is recorded in John Hyslop's racing books, which is not something most actors can say. When the war came, he tried to enlist and was turned down flat. The recruiting sergeant asked his occupation. He said film star, and that was the end of the conversation. He went back, got in, and served as an officer in the Wiltshire Yeomanry with the 8th Army in North Africa. Afterwards, he stayed on in the Territorial Army Reserve and retired as a captain in 1959 with the honorary rank of Major. Films fill the rest. Wings of the Morning in 1937 was the first British Technicolor feature. Beat the Devil, The Rainbow Jacket, The Camp on Blood Island, Dr. Terror's House of Horrors, Thunderball, Khartoum, and The Magic Christian followed. In 1953, he married the Honourable Rosemary Cybella Violet Grimston, daughter of the first Baron Grimston of Westbury, and they divorced 11 years later. No children are recorded. Afterwards, he took a job as a steward at Newbury Racecourse and went back to the horses, which is where he had started 60 years earlier before anybody had ever pointed a camera at him. He died in Hampshire on the 15th of December 1989, 12 days after his 81st birthday, aged 81. His memorial record carries no cemetery at all. Frank Garner was an old man with authority nobody needed. Edward Underdown was the real thing, and the man who invented James Bond wanted him. 3 series, 38 episodes, 8 of these 15 now gone, and not one recorded grave between them.